Today Kilroy goes off the shelf on random event tables. So why do I have a Dungeon Master's Guide from Advanced D&D sitting on my table? Well, that was my first encounter or experience with random event tables. If you go back to the Dungeon Master's Guide, there is the random dungeon generator, and as part of the random dungeon generator, there is several random monster encounters. And this is charts and charts and charts of rolling to figure out what monster you're going to encounter and what lair or what terrain or what environment. And so that was my first experience with random event type generators. My second one was Conquistador. So the Age of Exploration, an Avalon Hill game. And that game had the random event table right there on the board here. It's just a portion of the board. But as you can see there, you had the random event table, and it dealt with taxation and political events and affected the game in that fashion. Now, that's exactly how random event tables started. They started off as a table or a chart on a board, on a player aid, or in the rules. And then they quickly, moved to chit pulls, where you pull a chit and the chit represented a certain event, and then migrated into cards, which cards are probably the predominant way or primary way that random events are handled today. In fact, card-driven games usually have not only, action points or command points that allow you to do things, but they usually have events as well. The whole coin system has that aspect of using cards in multiple ways and having events or historical events and flavor that comes from that. So that's the primary way now. But the tables are still alive and still persist in games. It's my understanding that Richard Berg used to love putting random event tables into games and might have some kind of odd or bizarre effects that come from that. Some of my examples for my collection, from here, We Shall Fight on the Marne. Here's a pretty simple random event table. It's just a six-sided die, and then you roll, and it affects gameplay in some fashion. The Russo-Georgian War of 2008, it has a little bit more detailed random events for either the 2004 or 2008 scenarios. And they go a little bit different. The 2008 actually affects victory points based on the random events, and the 2004 can actually end the game early. And one of the events is that the game ends early, so it actually shortens the gameplay. And what these are usually trying to do is they're trying to give you some historical feel or try to model historical events. In that vein, you have the Joan of Arc Victory from Turning Point Simulations, which is kind of a sister company of Against the Odds magazine. And it has a random event that is based on, historical events and trying to, convey or give you some feel for the history of what was going on during that time. So you have some historical events here that add to the gameplay. Continuing on with that, Against the Odds Apocalypse in the East has a very detailed random event that, again, that's kind of going to the history, maybe not specific events, but maybe more general events that were happening during that time, and kind of giving you some feel or flavor. This one's a pretty specific event here as well, and they can get relatively detailed on how they affect gameplay in that regard. And I find that magazine games, that random event tables are alive and well in magazine games. I find them more in magazine games than I do in box games nowadays, or maybe it's just the games I'm buying. But magazine games, tend to deal with, somewhat, sometimes off the wall or off the beaten path type events or battles. And so they're trying to add a little bit more history or context to that. And so I think that's why they might tend to, use random event tables in that regard. Here is Munich War, which is a Pre-World War II is kind of a what-if scenario or hypothetical World War II situation from a magazine game. And it has an event table here at the bottom here that deals with weather, and then also deals with when some of the neutral countries might enter into the game. This is all about, the build up to World War II and maybe an early attack by Germany. And so you have players, maybe different countries, maybe sorting out differently, kind of doing different alliances. And so that affects that. But one of the notable things here is you see weather. A lot of games a lot of war games have weather charts, or what happened with the weather during a certain period, especially if it's going over a long period of time that might be comprised of multiple seasons. Then you might have a weather effects table, and that's kind of a random events table as well. I mean, the event is weather, and so you're trying to model what the weather is. Now, this is not limited to grand tactical or strategic type games. Tactical games gets into play with this as well. This is from Band of Brothers, Lock and Load, Band of Brothers, the first edition. And this scenario here, this is dealing with D-Day, and there was the cricket, which was the little click-clacker that the paratroopers used to communicate. And so there's a whole random event table here on using the cricket and having communication and what might happen. And one of the events might even bring you to this miscellaneous events, which you can see these are very detailed here. And what these are getting here, this is on the tactical level. So this is really mainly getting into narrative and giving you a little bit more color and flavor and feel for that event, or for what was going on the ground at a very tactical level. And you can see they're almost like a story, putting the narrative forward. And so this is from Lock and Load Tactical, and that series was also continued into, or Lock and Load actually did World at War, and then they extended into World at War Storming the Gap, World War E5 Storming the Gap. And what you had here is you had a combination of chits and random event tables, because you would put a chit. This is a card pool now in 85 World War E5. The original World War was chits, but you would pull that, and it would tell you whether you need to look at the event table. And then here's the event table. And then you roll on the event table, and there are specific things that happen that affect gameplay in the event. Now, you don't have to play with the events. I think that's sometimes is considered an optional rule in some of these scenarios, but it would actually pull out events that affect the gameplay. Also, on a tactical level, an oldie but a goodie, Battles and Leaders from Yaquinto. This game right here is tactical level. I think it's like maybe it's at the regiment level. It's about the lowest tactical level I can find for Civil War. But they had a leader hit table here. And so what this was doing, if your leader got hit, there's 11 to 66. This is the old 2 different colored dice, roll them, and then you read them off one number in front of the other. So you've got these different options here, but they get very, very detailed, as you can see here. I don't want to play anymore. So, again, getting back to the narrative, this is more at the tactical level, so they're trying to give you a story or a feel or a narrative of the combat and what was happening at that time. So, that's one of the reasons we have random event tables. A lot of sometimes they're in there. Sometimes they're in there for the weather, because you're just trying to give a feel for what the different optional weather could be. Sometimes you're trying to give a historical flavor. You're trying to get some events, especially if it's a game that is covering a longer period of time. You might want to get some of the events that happened during that period that could affect that conflict. So there's a historical feel. There is sometimes there's the fog of war, because you're dealing with sometimes perfect knowledge. You know how many units they have. You know what their combat values are, what their movement values are. You can look at the board. You know what the terrain is. So adding a random event gives a little bit of a fog of war. Adds a little bit of chaos to the game. So it kind of changes it up. It adds to replayability, and it gives the players some extra challenges that they have to deal with. So there could be numerous reasons why you have random events. Sometimes, some criticisms are that they're kind of add to lazy game design because, you have your game, but then, you don't really have a lot of historical fluff or feel, so you throw in some random events to try to spruce it up a little bit. There's also the aspect of random events mess up gameplay. That if you're playing games for a very competitive reason, or play war games because it's all about the head to head and who's going to win, then random events kind of mess with that and kind of mess your flow and mess with your strategies. And so some people don't like that. If you're playing games for the narrative and for the historical feel, and you want to get more immersed into what was happening, what could happen, how could things change in a certain battle, then you might like random events tables if they're done right. If they're adding to the what if aspect and not just throwing some random things in there. Of course, that's what they're called. They're called random events. They can be, as easy as a weather table, or they can be very, very complex and get into, adding to the victory conditions or shortening the gameplay. Example of one that's relatively unique is from Liberia, Descent into Hell. You've got this random event table, which is so big I can't even get it on the screen. It's bigger than the map, okay? This is a huge random event table, and this is getting into some very strange events. I'm not going to read all of them here because they might not be suitable for all audiences. But there's all kinds of different events that are on this table that, really trying to get the feel and the effect of that time period and what was happening and how things could potentially, affect the outcome of this conflict. So what do you guys think about that? Are you a purist and believe that, random events are just too random? We don't need them. I want to know what my combat values are. I want to know what my movement values are. I want to know what the terrain looks like. And I want to know any special parameter rules, but then I want to go at it. I want to see what I can do with this unit and what it did historically. Or are you more of into the narrative? You like the narrative, you like the feel, you like getting immersed into the history and what was going on, and like to get a little bit more flavor or fluff that goes along with it. And so in that respect, do you like random events tables? What are your guys' thoughts on that? Where do you guys stand on that? But I thought I'd share with you some random events today.